Hello, and welcome back to Older Than I Look, featuring me, Lizzy Co. I'm so glad you're here today. This episode is meant for anyone who's been through or is going through a hard time, or anyone who loves someone who's going through a hard time. So, really, almost anyone. It does contain a sad and disturbing story from my childhood, and the reason I'm sharing it with you is not to bring anybody down, but rather to let other people dealing with complex post traumatic stress disorder know that even if you had a tough start in life, that does not have to be how it ends. Things might feel really bad, and you might feel trapped in the life that you're living right now, but gaining your freedom and joy is possible. If you hang with me till the end of the podcast, I'll give you a nuts and bolts list of accommodations I use every day, and it's all free for you. I just want this information in as many hands as possible. We have to go back to the 90s, though, to show you why I built my list in the first place. My father was a carpenter, and when I was young, he had a wood shop that smelled like sawdust and motor oil. It was cold out in the shop, but peaceful. Peaceful was hard to find. I loved searching through my dad's giant red toolbox. Tucked into the lid was a picture of my older brother and me when I was a baby. In it, I'm sitting in a high chair, all devilish grin, twisting around to fling squash at my older brother. My brother is of two minds. He's holding me protectively, but also cringing away from my squash hands. We lived in the toolbox. I could pull the top drawer up and out to reveal many smaller sets of drawers, each holding its own tool. Everything had a place, and each layer opened up into more space to discover small treasures. Dad was a skilled craftsman with years of experience, and so his toolbox had a great number of odd little one-use tools, as well as classic choices like flat pencils, hand-sharpened with whatever box knife was nearby. Side note, I looked up why carpenter pencils are flat, and not only do they not roll off roofs, but they can hold a thicker lead, and the shape is easier to grip while you're wearing heavy gloves. Tools of the trade are so cool. I would use one of those pencils to doodle on his scrap lumber while he worked on his latest project, usually something up on sawhorses in the driveway if the weather was nice. Otherwise, he was stuck in the garage with the big door open for ventilation. I was delighted when he bought me my own smaller red toolbox to match his. Having no tools, I filled it with interesting pebbles and bits of candy from friends and small notebooks and pencils for journaling. My dad did eventually get me my own small screwdriver, which I promptly added to my toolbox. I still remember the nameless feeling boiling inside me when the guy at the mincer's register giggled at the idea of me having a tool of my own. I now recognize I was seeing some patriarchy bullshit, but I didn't have the words for it at the time, which made it all the more crazy making. Anyway, each thing inside the toolbox felt special, like something I could turn to when I felt the empty, overwhelmed feeling start to creep up my ribs and into my heart. I wonder now if my dad built his toolbox for the same reason. My dad created a lot of feelings of safety and comfort in my life when I was young, but he couldn't bear to contradict my mother if she felt I needed to be punished. He was so in love with her or broken by her, it was always hard to tell. They were both limited by their generation's idea that a mother knows best how to raise her child. My mother wanted the praise that comes with being seen as a good mom, and she was willing to go to extremes to get it, but she did not know best. What makes it hard is that based on her reports of her own childhood experience, she did better by me than was done by her. She was raised by a Korean war vet father and a devoutly Catholic mother who was paralyzed giving birth to my mother's youngest sibling. And she would tell me stories of how she took over cooking and cleaning when she was very young, and how she and her siblings spent time in not just any orphanage, but the frightening Catholic one in my home state that saw reports of horrific and creative child abuse. Needless to say, riding out a few of her rages here and there while in the comfort of my own bedroom could hardly be seen as a tough life in comparison, so fighting back was just an invitation for a further correction. Brains are really good at noticing patterns, and they're great at adapting to their circumstances. My brain wired itself differently than the average person, not because of something I was born with, like autism or ADHD, but in response to the environment I was raised in. Although the effects on my behavior and my daily experience are pretty similar to what autism and ADHD look like. There's a growing conversation around the idea that CPTSD is a type of neurodivergence, even though it's not something you're born with. It's being called an acquired neurodivergence. I'm curious to see what the research around that shows as more studies are done. If PTSD is like being in a car crash once, CPTSD is like being in a car crash a couple times a day for years on end. There's no time to process and heal between the injuries, so each one does more damage than the last, and more than it would have done on its own. If any of the following sounds familiar, you might be dealing with some CPTSD. I had an anxious mother who couldn't teach me how to be calm as a baby by co-regulating with me, so I ended up regulating myself up to her level of anxiety instead. I was a young child whose job it was to be cute and sweet to keep my mother happy and relaxed, and I learned that life was easier when I did my job well. Any negative feelings I expressed, even if they were valid, were crushed, erased, and replaced with what I should be feeling instead, which was usually gratitude for whatever I did have. As I grew older, it was increasingly my job to be my mother's therapist when we were alone on car rides or walks around the neighborhood, and I was too young to understand that it wasn't appropriate for her to burden a tween with adult concerns about work and relationships. My hunger, thirst, and rest were all based on her schedule, not my own assessment of what was happening in my body. And the idea that you're not hungry, you're just tired was useful for my mother growing up in a place where food was scarce. But in my childhood, we had enough food in the house for me to eat when I was hungry. And it's true that I was tired, but the reason I was tired was from lack of calories. At no point in my life was it ever my mother's job to help me feel safe and secure, and when I asked for help or support with something, she just told me I'd figure it out. She never actually helped me work out a solution with her more adult brain and greater life experience, but she also didn't want me seeking help from any other adults, not even my dad. As I learned that no one in the world was going to reassure me that everything would be all right other than myself, because everyone assumed my parents would do that job, and my parents assumed I would do it for myself. My dad acted as a sort of assistant manager to my mom's general manager. He'd help me where and when he could, but if she had it out for me, there wasn't anything he was willing to do to overrule her. He'd just disappear when the yelling started, but I loved him for at least being nice to me when she wasn't around. I often found myself wondering why I had been created if my parents didn't seem to want me around, even though they swore I had been planned. And I often thought the family would have been happier and more prosperous if I hadn't been born, since my older brother got along better with my mom and money always seemed tight whenever I wanted something. Gradually, I learned never to ask for anything I thought of on my own and to just choose from what was offered, because it hurt my parents' feelings when they couldn't give what I asked for, and that led to just a general bad mood in the house. Thinking that life would be better for everyone if I didn't exist was a short path to suicidal ideation as an escape. When I felt too unwelcome in the world, I remained smug in my secret knowledge that I could always just kill myself and stop dealing with their shit that way, and if I did, they could never reach me to hurt me again. So what does CPTSD look like when it's happening? This is what it looks like for me, but your mileage may vary. One thing that happens is dissociation. When the only way out is through, you can at least numb out until you're through. So what happens during dissociation? I lose connection with my body's sensations, both inside and out. So that includes having a hard time discerning if I'm hungry, or if I'm thirsty, if I'm hot, or if I'm cold. And eventually those things become obvious to me, but only when they're in an extreme state. It's really hard to keep myself regulated. I also have trouble feeling where I am in space, which makes me clumsy and afraid to move around. I have a lot of small bruises on my arms and my legs from just running into stuff because sometimes I'm just not really sure where my limbs are. I also lose connection with my ability to make plans and execute them, and I find it hard to do anything other than follow routines I already know well or follow clear instructions given by someone else. And this is something that makes me vulnerable because not everyone who gives clear instructions has my best interests at heart. Something else that happens are flashbacks. When things don't get processed fully, they end up forming these little splinters that just stay stuck in my body as I move through the world. And when a flashback happens, I have more of a body sensation and a feeling sensation than a visual element, simply because I have aphantasia, so I can't picture things in my mind. But I've heard from other people that they do have sometimes a visual element. But mine is more feeling how scared I was during the event I'm recalling and where inside my body that tension showed up from being scared. In those moments, I feel a strong need to hide somewhere quiet and get some deep pressure over large areas of my body, whether that's hopefully from a hug or maybe by lying down. Hypervigilance is another element of my CPTSD experience. My mother's unpredictable mood was the absolute authority of how the rest of my household behaved, so I got exceptional at reading her because I wanted to have an easy day, and that was the only option to have peace instead of screaming. I got really good at reading micro expressions and body language, kind of like the guy in that show Lie to Me. When I discovered that show, I was fascinated but also horrified because I realized I had the same skills as him, but just for a really awful reason. But this hypervigilance also makes me an excellent customer service manager in my day job because I can spot that customer who's behaving like they're friendly, but they're gonna go off on you if one single thing goes wrong. And I can make sure they never blow up so everyone has a good day. Another way I see CPTSD affecting my daily life is that I have a lowered ability to function in unfamiliar environments. I get overwhelmed sorting out what's danger, what just feels like danger, but it's really overstimulating, and what's safe. And it's hard to just enjoy the view. I feel the need to move quickly from wherever I am to wherever that point B is where I can let my guard down again. And stopping to just exist in the outside world when I'm not in a familiar environment feels awful. But that's also how you get familiar with new environments. So, and then you can see how rough this disability can be. Finally, I have a limited ability to name what I'm feeling in the moment, so I need extended time to put words to feelings. Growing up, my feelings were a complete afterthought compared to keeping my mother calm, because if I didn't, she would rage until she hurt me, then send me to my bedroom to think about what I had done. Later, she would come crawling back, claiming she had to, for some reason, do what she had done. Usually, for some reason, she came up with after she had time to cool off. My feelings were something I dealt with after she had come to my bedroom to tell me how I should feel, not something I looked inside and came up with on my own, because looking inside and naming those feelings would simply be too dangerous and painful. The only way I sorted this stuff out was by getting help. I found myself in need of hospitalization twice in my 20s and early 30s because I just didn't want to be on this earth anymore. And the second time, I was lucky enough to access an intensive outpatient program that supported my recovery further, but I still didn't feel stable. I was in that dangerous period of your late 20s where you have a lot of adult responsibility, but still aren't getting a lot of adult respect. And I was also trying to survive fresh out of grad school in the middle of a recession. I mean, there's a reason the 27 Club exists. None of this therapy effort was supported by my family, of course, as they were the reason I was so messed up in the first place, and I was too ashamed to tell my friends what was going on in my mind and my bank account. My partner at the time was extremely supportive, but without the additional network of family to help me, I found myself consistently anxious and depressed, despite all the talk therapy and medication I applied to the problem. And no matter how aware I was of the lifeboats all around me, I kept feeling myself slip beneath the waves anyway. I felt out of control physically, cycling through erratic nausea, vomiting, and exhaustion that I couldn't explain. Even as I typed this, that same old nausea boiled in my stomach and made saliva pool in my mouth to protect my teeth from my stomach acid. But these days, I understand what it means, and I let it pass without engaging. I stay upright. I make a cup of mint tea and wait for it to pass. After far too long, I found a therapist who had the skills and experience required to work with my situation. I spent a decade working weekly with her, and she took the time to dig in and explore what might be the thread connecting all my life struggles and health issues. She used a method called internal family systems, which is controversial to some, but I believe this might be because the life experiences that require IFS therapy are repulsive to the general public. And I think that civilized folks don't want to believe that this stuff is necessary in the first place. It's necessary. With my therapist's help, I cataloged what was happening to me socially and the ways my body responded. I noticed how I felt after I spoke to different people in my life, particularly my mother. I explored how my body responded when I thought back to my harder early years, and I cataloged that too. Each week, I apologized to my therapist for having feelings, and she reminded me that I'm allowed to have them and to share them with others. I searched for patterns, and I came to understand that while I might not ever be able to afford an autism diagnosis as an adult living in America, my brain behaves in many of the same ways that autistic brains do. I'll never know if I was born autistic or if my brain rewired in a similar way due to CPTSD, but knowing what kind of brain I have means I can care for it properly. Think about it like washing your hair. If you have very dry hair and you use a shampoo for oily hair that's meant to strip oil away, you're gonna have a very bad time, even though you're doing the right thing by washing your hair regularly. Someone with oily hair is going to look at that shampoo bottle, maybe even try out some of it on their own hair, and assure you that everything is fine. But you know that your hair is looking crazier every time you use that shampoo. One day, you see some people online talking about their own dry hair, and you feel seen. You see them show off the unfamiliar looking shampoos they found that actually moisturize their hair instead of stripping it dry, and you feel hope. You order the strange new shampoo for yourself, and you can't believe your eyes the first time you use it. You've never worked with your hair before, you've always been fighting it. It's not an overnight miracle, though. It takes a daily active choice to reach for the new shampoo instead of the one you've been reaching for your entire life. And there will be days when you're in a hurry and you forget and you grab the old stuff without realizing until it's already all up in your hair. All you can do in that moment is rinse it out, give yourself some grace, and maybe add in some hair product for your dried out strands. It's the same with learning about the effects of CPTSD on the brain and how they change what I need to thrive. Just like dry hair, I need a protective barrier between the world and me. I need more alone time and quiet time to regulate than the average person does. I need routine and minimal decision making in my day. There are some days when the outside world feels like too much to process, and on those days, I just stay inside. I let myself have a low stimulation day where I can spend a long time with my eyes closed, listening to podcasts or TV shows I've watched before, nothing surprising or scary. I don't need to seek out thrills because my brain doesn't know they're not actual danger, and it's just not fun to try to regulate myself down from being triggered when I'm out in public. It's absolutely something I can do, but it's not how I want to spend my downtime. I gathered a list for you of the daily accommodations I use to function as an adult living in a city environment. They fall into 3 broad categories: avoiding triggers, proactive measures, and trigger aftercare. Avoiding triggers. One thing I do is I get my groceries delivered. This helps me avoid the fluorescent lights in the grocery store that are really overwhelming and cause migraines for me. And it also helps me avoid being in tight quarters with strangers because at least where I live in Boston, the grocery store aisles can be pretty narrow. Another thing I do is I will avoid public transit. I will walk, bike, or treat myself to an Uber. This is again to avoid fluorescent lighting, but it's also to avoid the loud noise, the unpredictable schedule, the maybe not having somewhere to sit, and worrying about taking up a disabled seat because I don't look disabled. When I do go out, I have noise canceling over ear headphones and I play white noise in those headphones because it just levels out all of the city noise that comes in spikes and can be extra overwhelming. And if you have an iPhone, there's a setting on there that will allow you to add background noise to podcasts or music or even just nothing at all that you're listening to, which I really love. Finally, I have reduced my social interaction. I value quality over quantity. I don't put myself in situations where I can't step away for a moment, so I'm not getting on any party buses. Some proactive measures I take to help with my CPTSD. Big one is therapy. Like I mentioned, internal family systems therapy was incredibly helpful for me, but dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, also helped me learn a lot of the basic life skills that I just wasn't taught as a child. And I did try cognitive behavioral therapy, and while I didn't find that to be as useful for my own situation, it's absolutely valid, and I think that you should give it a try and see if it works for you as well. Another big one for me is medication. I just have a brain that needs some extra help regulating, and that includes proper medications. And something that I wish someone had told me is that you may not get it right on the first, second, or third try with psychiatric medications. But I encourage you to keep trying because the right one does exist, the right dose does exist. It's maybe you need a combination of things, but the right regimen does exist and you can find it. It's sort of like dating. Sometimes you don't know how you're going to respond to something or someone until they're already inside you. And at that point, you just got to ditch it and move on to try something new. Something else that I really need is predictability and routine wherever possible. So this includes having the same basic uniform I wear every day, and I also have the same basic meal plan that I follow every day. I also drink out of the same water bottle every day. I got one that feels good in my hand and is leak proof, so I can throw it in my backpack. So I drink out of it at home. I bring it with me out in the world. It helps me regulate. It's something safe from home. And it also helps me keep track of how much I'm drinking to make sure that I'm hydrating enough, because that's another thing I struggle with is just noting how thirsty I am, because I tend not to notice. Something else I do is I journal regularly because, like I've mentioned, I don't have a great real-time sense of how I'm feeling. So having that regular check-in, writing things out on paper, and connecting the dots after the fact is really helpful. And it's helping me to gradually get closer to a real-time assessment of how I'm feeling. It used to take me many days to figure out how I felt about something, and now I can figure it out maybe an hour or two after the fact. And that's due to consistent practice. So that's something that you can absolutely achieve as well. Finally, I am a big believer in breathing practices as a way to regulate your nervous system. And the one that I use every day is box breathing or square breathing. You may have heard it called either one. And it's a simple matter of breathing in for 4, holding for 4, out for 4, and holding for 4. And you repeat that cycle until you feel your heart rate decrease, you feel your blood pressure decrease, you feel everything start to relax. Lastly, let's talk about trigger aftercare. When you can't avoid the trigger, what do? My first recommendation is if you are not at home or in a safe location that is similar to your home, get yourself to one of those locations first. So ideally, we are talking about a situation where you can get yourself home when you are triggered to then do proper aftercare. I will do another episode in the future, and when we can talk further about in the moment trigger care when you can't get home, when you can't get to that safe location. But for now, let's talk about when you do get yourself home after you've been triggered. Things that I use include a weighted blanket and a weighted hoodie, because these immediately are going to go to work, starting to calm that flight instinct, and it's going to remind me where my body is in space. It's going to remind me, here you are. You're not in the space where you were scared. You're in a new and different location, and the danger is now far away. In a similar vein, I'm going to use an eye mask with weighted eye cups, because that's going to calm down the hypervigilant gaze that I most likely have, and it's also going to calm down my face muscles, which are most likely pretty tense. Finally, we're going to add some noise canceling over-ear headphones. AirPods are simply not enough in this situation. We need the physical covering of the ear as well as the canceling of the sound. And in those headphones can be anything you like. It can be silence, it can be a podcast, it can be music, whatever you want, as long as it's something that is going to be regulating to you. And once we assemble all of these things, we're going to go into cave time. And cave time means you're alone. It means you don't have any requirements to speak to anyone or to process speech that anyone is speaking to you. And there's also no time limit. There's nobody standing at the door with their eye on the clock saying, I need you here in half an hour. There's a real sense that you have time to get back to regulated however long that takes. While I hope that none of the stuff I talked about today is relevant to your life, if it is, I want you to know that you are not alone in the least. There are good therapists out there who can help and who post free content on YouTube. There are a lot of amazing Substackers writing about this topic and sharing their own experience. And there are still a lot of good people out in the world, even if you met some bad ones to start. Thank you so much for watching or listening today. See you next time.
Let's talk about controversy, headlines and hypocrisy. Scandal that shocking.